So in this video, we're going to talk about some of the key things that just make the London property market very different. Hi everyone, Ugo Renze here with Onyx Property Consultants powered by Keller Williams. Over the years, I've worked with countless buyers and sellers, and especially foreign buyers. And one of the things that they really stumble over when they get started are all the different components about what it takes to actually buy property in London. Having come over here from America, one of the things that really blew my mind was the fact that buyers aren't being represented by agents. In America, we're very used to having the seller being represented by an agent and the buyer being represented by an agent, and both are licensed and really have a fiduciary responsibility to look after each side. So that means when you're buying, you've got somebody really representing you and looking out for your best interests. They spend time with you, they organize your visits, they get feedback from you, and they really can help you figure out what you're looking for, give you a sense of the property market, what you might need to compare when you're thinking about different properties, and sometimes actually to be really realistic with you, to help you understand how far your budget can go. So coming over to the UK and London, it kind of really struck me as so bizarre that the market's really set up with estate agents who really work on behalf of the seller. So that means the buyers are often having to navigate the entire process by themselves. That means, say, if you were looking in, say, a neighborhood like Notting Hill and you had a budget of up to £1 million and you wanted to buy a 2-bedroom, it means you kind of have to go online, figure out, see what properties might suit your criteria, and say a dozen properties do. They might be on with 6 or 7, maybe even 10 different estate agents. It means when you even just go out to view properties that you've got to register with each of those estate agents, and they can only show you what's in their stock, but nobody's really looking after your best interest and really trying to help you find the right property. They're really just trying to push the property that they have to see if it matches what you're looking for. Say also that you might be considering one neighborhood but might not have thought about another neighborhood. It means you don't have somebody really looking after you, and that's actually one of the biggest weaknesses I see, because I often work with buyers, and one of the things I'm able to do is start with where they think they want to look, but also make sure that we can offer them some other choices. So that's number one. Number two is the concept of stamp duty, which is a tax on purchase. Again, comparing it to America, we're not very used to that. We're not used to paying an additional tax at the time of purchase. But stamp duty is something that the UK government has definitely become heavily reliant on, and it has changed over time and has gotten much more expensive, especially at higher property values. So you can be paying anywhere from 7, 10 to 12%, and if you own it in an offshore vehicle, you might be paying an additional 3%. And there's even additional conversation right now from the government about adding an additional stamp duty charge for those buyers who are foreign buyers. So make sure when you're budgeting to buy a property, you've also factored in the stamp duty, which is not something you can add to a cost of a mortgage. It's going to be a payment that's really coming out of pocket at completion. The other thing to think about when considering property in London is the whole concept of leasehold versus freehold. That is something that's not really applicable in America. I'd say probably the closest thing might be buying a condo that has HOA fees. In UK, what you typically need to think about is leasehold versus freehold. I'll have a separate video where we really break down the difference between leasehold and freehold. But the point is, especially if you're looking in London, you're going to encounter mostly leasehold properties, which means that your property is one of several in the building. And so with owning a leasehold, it means that you're going to be paying additional charges such as service charges and ground rent to the freeholder. But the bottom line is, for a leasehold property, you're sharing communal space, or you're sharing the building with other units, and there's going to be a lease that's going to govern what it is you can do. So there's things you definitely need to understand when you're thinking about leasehold versus freehold. The other thing to think about in the buying process is where you want to live and what type of property you might want to consider. I've talked a little bit about leasehold versus freehold, but then there's also the concept of converted terrace flats, which again, people might not always really know what that means. So there's really, in essence, two core options when you're thinking about a flat. One is it a converted property or a converted terrace property, which means that it was originally a single family home that might have been split into flats over time. Other choice is a flat that might be in a purpose-built block, which means really in a building. So it was built for the purposes of being a block of flats. And then in that situation, you're going to find that your layouts might make a little bit more sense. The room proportions are more in balance. Whereas in a converted terrace, they have more charm and character and they might have more details because they're a historical property that has now been converted to a flat. But where you'll probably trade off is sometimes the room layouts and the configuration might not always make the most sense because they've had to figure out a place to put the front door, say if you're on a first floor flat, or hallways and stairs and things like that. So that's definitely something to think about. Then let's say you have found the right property and now you're getting ready to make an offer. Well, that's something that's also completely different, right? Because again, if you're not working with the buying agent, then you've basically are going to have to do your own diligence, figure out what you think you want to, type of offer you want to make on the property. And if your offer is accepted and the agent has taken it to the seller and your offer is accepted, you then have to get a solicitor, and there's the conveyance process. So the conveyance process is basically the whole due diligence and title search process when your solicitor is working with the seller solicitor to basically make sure that you've got all the title work done, any queries, any questions, all the things you're going to need to do to make sure that title can be transferred cleanly to you. But the key components are that there's exchange and completion, which are two different hurdles that have to be met. But suffice it to say that before you get to exchange, either party can walk away, which is again a concept that we're not used to in America, because in America, when you find the right property, you typically work with your agent, sit down, write an offer that's actually legally binding, and you'd be paying a significant deposit at the time that your offer is accepted, which I think is the better way to go, because it means that if a seller has agreed to sell to you on your terms, it can be subject to a couple things, such as, say, an appraisal or getting financing, but it means that you really have two committed parties that aren't going to go away. So those are some of the key components to thinking about buying a property in London that are different than, say, if you've come over and thinking about buying a property in, say, America. Each one of those have a lot to cover in them, which I'll have separate videos on each component. So make sure, if you want to continue to learn more about buying property, or perhaps if you're thinking about selling property in London, then make sure to subscribe to my channel and find out more, as I'm going to be producing weekly videos to keep you up to date, and also showing off why London is such a great place to live, work, and to reside. So that's Ugo Renze with Onyx Property Consultants, powered by Keller Williams. Bye for now.